Good morning. I want to thank you for coming out on this rainy day. And I just dropped something. I'll pick that up. First, let me say that even some of the so-called education reformers who are responsible for creating Florida's current testing and accountability system have admitted it is an incomprehensible mess. FEA is not opposed to testing, accountability, or change. In fact, Vice President Joanne McCall has said many times, teachers invented testing. Florida's multi-million-dollar testing system has provided little benefit to the majority of public school parents, students, teachers, education staff professionals, or even administrators. Instead, it has consumed a tremendous amount of time and money that could and should be spent on real teaching and learning. But I will say that the state's overuse of testing has succeeded in one thing. It has created a statewide backlash that is uniting parents, teachers, school employees, community leaders, and school administrators. They are saying enough is enough. State lawmakers know they must address excessive testing during this legislative session, and they are frantically looking for ways to relieve the pressure, even though they don't clearly understand the complete extent of the problem. In the meantime, the consequences of this failed experiment are very, very real. Our students are being robbed of the opportunity to learn. Parents and teachers are given test results that should be used as a diagnostic tool, but the results are not delivered in a timely manner, and the information is not detailed enough to actually provide any guidance to parents or teachers. Local school district budgets must absorb the costs of all the tests that are not state-written tests, which forces school boards to eliminate valuable programs. Teachers and administrators are subject to sanctions and penalties because their evaluations are based on tests that have not been properly field tested in Florida and are not fully aligned to the standards that teachers are teaching. It is hard to imagine that legislators can find a solution in the next 60 days to a problem that they have spent 15 years creating. And sadly, they aren't asking the right questions. Education Commissioner Pam Stewart just finished an investigation into the tests being given by the school districts. We think she left out some really important questions about the use and impact of these state assessments on students and schools. We think she should be asking, how many days does it take for a school to administer all of the assessments? How long does it take the required script and login process? How many classroom computers, instructional labs, and media centers are being used for testing? How many career and technical classrooms are being used for testing? What do students enrolled in virtual classes do if they can't access computers at school? Does the bandwidth required for testing affect the use of technology in other classrooms? Are teachers being provided access to training in the testing format and the new standards? Will teachers have timely access to data on their students by performance standards, by concept, by skill? And how the heck are we using this data to actually improve instruction? The legislature and the DOE are focused on how many hours a student actually spends on testing, but they have no clue to how many teaching days are lost every year in a school due to testing. Several weeks ago, FEA launched Assess the Test. I'm going to ask Vice President Joanne McCall to talk a little about our Assess the Test survey report that was just completed. Joanne?
Thanks, Andy. Over the years, we've heard plenty from our members and parents, school administrators, about the growing reliance on testing that's put above everything else in schools. But we wanted to get a better idea of just what teachers and other school employees thought. So we devised and assessed the test, and we asked our parents, our teachers, our school administrators to log on to the test and give some grading. And so we wanted to know, are they being crafted and administered appropriately? Are the results useful in improving teaching and learning, or is it just assessments? So in a 3-week time period, we had over 20,000 responses, and this is what teachers said. 57% gave testing an F. 32% gave it a D grade. Of our school-related employees, who are paraprofessionals, who work with students one-on-one, those types of individuals in our schools, they graded the test 54% with an F and 25% with a D. Now our parents, that was the interesting part. Our parents, 64% gave testing an F grade in Florida, and 22% handed out a D. So as I've told you about the F's and D's, that's the majority of what the people who surveyed said. In addition to assigning a letter grade, we asked for some real-world examples of the issues of this massive current testing system is creating in our schools, for students and for teachers. We included several of those comments in your packet today. Here are some of the things that the DOE and the Florida legislature simply refuse to hear. Schools must use every computer they have and every space in the school to administer all the required exams within the testing window, even though the assessment calendar starts now in March through the end of school. So all of those computers are being utilized for testing in some form or fashion. We have to create special bells so that students can't move between classes who are not taking the test, and they have to be held in classrooms so that students who are taking the test are not interrupted. Teachers are the ones that must administer this test. It must be a certified teacher that gives the exam. That means students who are not being tested are having substitutes fill in for certified teachers and losing precious time in their classroom. So there's no question that all of this piece is branded by flawed school grading system. Our teachers are being labeled with faulty data, and our students are being traumatized and wasted precious years testing rather than learning. And as if that's not enough, Florida is in the process of implementing new standards along with a new test. Last session, we asked to take a timeout, to use some common sense, to stop what we're doing, look at what we're doing, and make sure that we fix this accountability system. Andy has said it, and we have always said it. FEA is not afraid of accountability, and we're not afraid of a test. But we are interested in making sure that what we get from those assessments is real and makes a difference in the lives of our students. Tests and assessments should be given for one reason: to know where a student is and to improve your teaching and learning strategies in the classroom. That's what assessments are about. Assessments should never be advised just to grade schools or evaluate teachers. So when we were in the Senate Ed Committee, we were asked for some bullet point recommendations. They didn't want to hear the stories of what was taking place in our schools. They didn't want to understand the problem and then how to fix it. They just wanted quick bullet points. So we gave them to them, and I'll give them to you once again today. We recommend reducing the number of required state tests, not just local tests, state tests as well. We must uncouple the high-stakes consequences from assessments, and we must thoroughly review the use of data and a means to ensuring that the data is returned to teachers, parents, and students in a timely fashion in order to improve teaching and learning. We should be replacing the Florida Standards Assessment with, I know this is going to sound shocking, a nationally normed reference test that can be given in a day or two rather than over weeks. It seems to have worked very well in the past. I'm not sure why we need to reinvent the wheel when something's working. We also hear that that's the assessment that voucher schools use, and if it's good for one set of the environment, it should be just equally as well for public schools as well. And we should reduce the proportion of student test data in teacher evaluation to no more than 30%, because that's what research tells us is an appropriate amount. And we should get rid of the convoluted VAM, which is the value added measure that nobody seems to be able to understand. Testing season and the legislative session both start next week. It's time that the legislature and the Florida DOE hears us loud and clear that testing has run amok, and we need to take back our schools and make sure that what's happening in our schools is best for our students. And so you can see that we have a lot of props that we'll answer questions about. We also have a terminal, which I can't see it.
Right over here.
Over there. It's set up where you can actually log on to the Florida DOE website where there's a practice test. You can see what third graders are being asked. You can see what fifth graders are being asked. And then you can see if you would be able to manipulate that test. Quite honestly, teachers are quite, they're required to show this and have each student do a practice test, but we are quite concerned that as they look at this new testing system and format and how it is so much different from what they have been used to doing, that they will become intimidated and shut down before the test even begins. So I encourage you to take a look at that before you leave today. I proctored Andy this morning, so he could actually maybe tell you a little bit about his experience, because it was a little unnerving for a 59-year-old man. So we'll entertain any questions that you might have.
So the governor's executive order doesn't make much of a difference in your opinion?
Actually, the governor's executive order is right here. It pops out this test right here for 11th graders, and although we applaud that and we think that's an absolute great first step, and we believe the 11th graders shouldn't be subjected to that test again, it does very little in the testing scheme of things.
Why do you think that particular test was taken out of the mix and not the different one?
Because I believe it's a test that they've already been tested on in a different format. That's what I believe.
In 10th grade.
In 10th grade. And if they passed it, I'm really not sure what the opportunity, I'm really not sure what the purpose of taking it again would be.
I have a question, two-part. So if, A, you believe the governor has the authority to suspend the test, and if you do believe he has the legal authority, do you think he should issue an executive order and maybe suspend the entire accountability system for the first year to allow your baseline and other things like that? Do you think the governor should maybe go beyond his current executive order and maybe suspend everything?
I don't think the governor's gone far enough. I don't know if he has the authority to do it, but we can try and figure it out and see what happens once he does it. But we would think that the governor ought to have an executive order that delays all of this for a year or two in order to try to bring everything together and figure out, is the system that we have in place helping instruction, and does it help kids?
Andy, when you talk about doing all of this, you're talking about the new assessments, the accountability piece, everything. Can you just elaborate?
Everything. We ought to go ahead and administer the test, because we can get some data back. That could be our field test this year, so that we could see if the questions are correct, if the multiple choice answers that a kid has to choose from actually contain the correct answers, or are there multiple answers there, so that we can figure out which questions are good, which questions are bad, and then we can establish a baseline, and then we can move from there. So we should still go ahead and administer the test, but we shouldn't have the consequences for that test.
Once again, why is it so important to you to decouple the testing from teacher pay?
It's not only teacher pay, it's the tests are making life decisions for human beings, whether they're 10 years old or they're 59 years old. And we don't know if the tests that we're using are accurate. Are they fair? Does the question really judge my knowledge, or is it my motor skills on how to use a mouse? Do I know how to use the toolbar on the computer correctly in order to answer the question? How long does it take me to figure out how to use the toolbar to answer the question? I took the 3rd grade math test a little while ago, and it's not as easy as you would think. They ask you to develop an area on a map of 12 squares, and until you figure out how to manipulate the toolbar, you can't answer the question. There are others where it asks you to do a lot of mental math in order to choose the answers that are appropriate for the question. So the tests are very complicated. It's a different format than what children are used to. I mean, you know, for 15 years we've been taking a test in one format. Now we're changing the way we ask the question. Unless the teacher started at the beginning of the school year asking students the question the way the test is going to ask the question, you're really setting the kids up for failure. Basically, our tests were created in Utah.
Field tested.
Field tested in Utah. Utah is now trying to back away from that test because of the results that they received last year, where a majority of their students failed the test. So if we can use that as a predictor of what's going to happen here, we are looking at having 3rd graders retained, maybe based on flawed data. We're going to have teachers' evaluations based on what might be flawed data. You're going to have teachers pay based on what might be flawed data. Let's figure out if the test is appropriate first, and then we can let everything else kick in.
And I'd like to answer that as a mother. So I have a junior at Leon High. The only system he has ever known is high-stakes testing. That is not a measure of what my kid knows in the classroom. He has multiple tests that he takes during the school year. He has quizzes, he has class projects. When you look at multiple measures of what a kid is doing in those classrooms, that should be the best judge of what a student's doing. And then to stay, at the end of the day, you're going to take a high-stakes test and it's winner takes all. It's just not appropriate as we're trying to maneuver through a system and make kids the best productive citizens they can be. And I want everybody to be real clear, not every student is college bound, nor do we want every student to be college bound. We need all types of professions. And so trying to make kids become widgets and fit into a mold is never the appropriate place for students. So we should not be doing that to our students. And as a mom, I take great offense to that. And when I told my 11th grader that he wasn't going to have to take this test, he says, "But we've already done the practice." And I said, "Well, then I guess that's all there is, because we're not going to take the test."
Well, you can expand a little bit on the idea that the tests don't actually help improve the teaching or help the student because they happen so late in the year.
Oh, absolutely. So we have this current system that we have now. When the testing data comes back, it's already summertime or fall. So if you're really going to judge whether a teacher should remain in the classroom, we're already into another school year and we already have a new set of kids. We have no way of adjusting what our strategies worked or didn't do to make it better because we're already on to another class. Also, we are not given enough data from the test to tell us what needs to be changed in your curriculum or in your instruction. It's very generic, so it's not like I know that a certain standard I didn't teach well and that I need to readjust that to make it different. When we look at assessments, this is the bottom line. As a classroom teacher, if I taught a lesson and gave a test and everybody did poorly on the test, that's on me, ladies and gentlemen. That was me that didn't reach my students, and it was me that needed to readjust my lesson, to reteach it so they could do better. If I gave a lesson and by the bell curve only a small percentage didn't do well on the test, then that wasn't on me. It was a certain segment of the population that I didn't reach, but then I need to reach that population through a retooling of that lesson. That's what good teaching and learning should always be about. But the ladies and gentlemen down the street aren't interested in that. We're looking at a way to grade schools, grade teachers, and have high-stakes consequences for third graders, 10th graders, and life-changing events.
Lawmakers and the governor have said that what's kind of driving this really is the local tests, the district mandated tests more than the state mandated tests. What's the flaw in that, and how should the state address that?
The legislature passed a law that said we have to have an end-of-course exam in every subject at every grade level. They are creating some tests, the district are creating the other tests. Under state law, schools have to have continuous progress monitoring. Therefore, there are assessments given all year long in order to be able to predict the score that a student's going to have at the end of the year. So even if a district is picking a test, it's pretty much based on state law that's telling the district they have to. I think it's a dance that we're trying to do in this city, where you've got the Department of Education and the legislature who are trying to figure a way out of the mess that's been created and put blame somewhere else. They're blaming local school districts, and local school districts, for the most part, are only following what state law mandates.
And then there's federal law.
And then you have federal law that requires 17 tests
And do
also.
you think this clarifies things for local districts or clouds them further? I mean, they've got direction from the governor saying one thing, direction from the legislature saying something different. What are they going to do?
Last night I read on Facebook a lot of posts that said our kids are still being told we're going to go ahead and take the test even though the governor is saying that they're studying it, we may not do it. I mean, testing starts next week, and it runs from now until the very end of the school year. So unless the governor communicates something between now and Monday morning, kids are going to start taking tests.
A couple of weeks ago, former Governor Bush was here in town. He actually dropped your name to support the event.
I saw the video.
You saw the video?
We'd like to give them an Andy Ford plan.
But I wanted to, I mean, he went on about that he felt that your organization is interested in protecting monopoly and protecting the economic interests of adults. And he sort of hypocritical of your take on everything that's been going on with the accountability system. I would wonder if I could get your response to that in terms of as he prepares for an actual possible presidential bid that you think that his criticism.
The former governor has never liked the positions of this organization because we've always wanted to talk about what it was, the agenda, what his agenda was, and whether we could help clarify that. Even if we disagree on the principle, we are willing to work with the people who disagree with us on trying to make what they're trying to do work. Because all we're interested in is what's best for kids. And what we're currently doing isn't. The former governor has never been willing to accept anybody else's opinion other than his own or the people who agree with him. And what the governor has set up here is, he blames us for trying to go after, protect a monopoly. He's trying to expand the testing industry and the textbook industry through his legislation that he has always advocated for. We're not doing what's best as long as he continues to try and throw stones at me. I'm not returning those stones. I find some of his comments very entertaining.
Is there a maximum level of testing or some kind of threshold beyond which you don't want to go? You're saying there's too many tests. How many would be sufficient?
Well, nationally normed reference tests would give us more data. Unless I am told through the test result, a kid in my class does not know how to multiply a 2-digit number by a 2-digit number. That's the kind of detail I need back as a teacher in order to have this actually help kids. I'm not getting that. I get whether they're a level 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, and that tells me absolutely nothing about what they've mastered and what they haven't mastered. The way we originally started this long ago, back when Governor Childs was governor, the idea was that I'm going to get a sheet that explains what skills every kid in my class knows and which ones they still need help with so that I can group my students appropriately so that they can master all the skills. That's the kind of data we need. And we can get that from a standardized test that has a long track record, that's norm reference, because then that tells me how that child is doing compared to every other kid in the United States who took that test.
So that's a single test for all students, every grade.
Correct. It does not get to the need that some in the legislature have, where every single test, every single subject has to have an end-of-course exam. I met with a group of teachers a couple weeks ago, and they were discussing the EOCs that they took in January for year-long, for semester-long classes, and then it was a midterm for those who were in year-long classes. And the one that I found the most entertaining was the weightlifting test. There is actually an end-of-course exam in this county on weightlifting. The problem with the test was it included 3 volleyball questions, so that unless you have taken the volleyball class before that, you don't know what the answers to those are. So there's some invalid tests out there that have inappropriate questions in them. We need time to weed those out and get them correct. If we're trying to build this system, even if we don't agree with it, we want to build what's best and have it work.
Do you see, is school grading something that should be just dropped? That you seem to be saying earlier that school grading is something that I guess at least under this current system is unfair and impossible to administer.
Well, what we ought to do is have a moratorium on all the high-stakes consequences that would include school grades until we know the test is valid. That's
School
the big-
grades in and of themselves you might support under a different system.
Yes,
Grading
school grades have been around for 15 years. Our position has evolved. We've kind of gotten used to them, even though we don't necessarily agree with them. I think, school grades pretty much are the best predictor of the economic level of the neighborhoods and the zip codes, so that we pretty much can tell you what the school grades are going to be before we administer the test. And I think that's the problem. As long as we can predict where our scores are going to be the lowest, we're not doing our job to move all students forward. We still have kids that are underachieving, and we need to correct that.
That has been the take for the last 15 years. Why do you think what makes you think you'll be heard this time?
Just because the legislature isn't hearing us doesn't mean we're going to change our position. We look at what is best for the students of this state. And as long as we have a system that is unfair to children, we are going to speak up and we're going to speak loudly. The difference between now and before, parents are now frustrated with the system. They're frustrated with the fact that their kids come home stressed out, that they're worried, they're fearful about having to take a test, that they're not comfortable with the new material and the new way of doing things. When you look at the test, and if you look at everything we're doing through the new Florida standards that are called everywhere else Common Core standards, you'll see that the way I'm learning has changed. And it's going to take a while for kids to catch up with the new system. I went to elementary school in the 60s. And I am a product of, we started phonics, we ended phonics because we were no longer doing phonics. I am old arithmetic, modern math. I was the kid that kind of got lost when we all of a sudden changed from one system to another, expecting everybody just to be able to perk up and figure it out. That's the kind of kid I'm fighting for right now. One who's not going to make the transition from an old system that they were somewhat successful with to this new way that they may not be successful. And then when you look at it from a teacher's point of view, most of the teachers that are teaching right now, about half of them, this is the only system they've ever worked in. The old standards were the ones that they were taught and figured out how to teach. The new standards, they haven't had the time to make the transition from the old to the new, which is an entirely different way of instructing kids. Not saying it's bad. Actually, in some respects, I think kids working in cooperative groups where they have to build projects and everything is task-oriented, not just necessarily memorizing information, is a better way to teach. But as a teacher, I need time to be able to make that transition. I need the money to help me go out and buy the materials that I need so kids can have hand-on learning. Notice I said, as a teacher, I need the money. Because forget the state providing the money to try and go from one system to the other. This is really left on the backs of all the teachers in this state to figure out how to implement with very little training. And you're asking me to go from one system that I was very comfortable in to an entirely new world without any break in the consequences for it not working.
And you don't know if the new standards and the new test align. We have no way of knowing that at this particular point.
Because a teacher can't see the test. If I'm an algebra teacher, I can't give the algebra exam. Some other teacher has to be pulled from his or her classroom to give my kids the test, and it may not be all my kids at the same time. I'm doing something else why the kids are testing, because I can't see the test.
So you said that even if the legislature does not hear you, what is the plan? Stand on a street corner across from the Capitol and keep drawing attention?
I think they are hearing us.
Do you think?
I think they are hearing us. I believe there's so much pressure and momentum building from the parent organizations, and we've had a couple of districts who have then said, we want to opt our kids out, and that's the movement. And then the commissioner said, you can't opt your children out. I'm not sure who can tell me what my personal child can and can't do, but apparently the commissioner can tell me what my child can and can't do. But the bottom line is parents are hopping mad and they're angry. And at least the senators are feeling the heat. That's why they had their workshop to get their bullet points. That's not so much why they were workshopping it and weren't so interested in hearing all of the stories. They just want a quick solution because their hair is on fire, and we know their hair is on fire, and we will be here to provide them the assistance they need to put it out a little bit, but it's not a one-stop quick fix. This is something that's gonna take time, and they're gonna have to listen over a long period of time. But I don't believe the public nor the parents are gonna let this go, because this is too critical. To those of us who have children in the public school system, it is too critical to let this go at this juncture. And our organization will always be the one that stands up for kids. We are accused of being a special interest. Damn straight we are. It's about kids.
What would the practical effect of uncoupling the consequences of the tests be? Wouldn't it take away the reason for the tests versus why have the tests?
Well, from our point of view, we don't think it would take away the purpose of the test ought to be able to,
There won't be any consequences, why take the test? It's a lot of money and effort
Because-
goes in it.
because you get data from that. If, just, kids,
Data isn't,
kids have always taken tests. It is now that we have decided that it is, the purpose of taking a test is to be promoted from third grade to fourth grade or to graduate. The purpose is now to get a credit for the course that you used to be able to get credit from just by performing for 180 days in the course. The purpose of the test now is so that I, as a teacher, can have 50% of my evaluation based on test scores. So that's why we have to have a test in every single subject at every grade level. It's to evaluate the teacher, it's not to evaluate the student. Those kids that took that weightlifting EOC, it wasn't to judge whether they really knew how to do weightlifting or not, it was to judge the teacher. The legislature is trying to sidestep what really is happening with this testing system that we have in place. And just causing a pause for a couple years does not do harm to the system, does not do harm to children. Any good teacher, even an average teacher, can tell you exactly what kids know and don't know on the subject matter that they're teaching, based on their daily contact with students. So just for this time period, as we make this huge transition from the old world to the new world, let's give people some time and not hold them hostage. You're going to have teachers fired who may be fired based on flawed data. You're going to have their pay limited, maybe based on flawed data. Their evaluation may be marked down because the data is flawed. Let's make sure all these systems work before we try to implement them. That's all we're saying.
But
You know,
how do
the,
you know that? I mean, when we looked at the first rounds of the ban data, most teachers throughout the state have been ruled highly effective or effective under the current model. So, I mean.
That doesn't mean it's accurate. We'd
So you're
rather
saying
have it
that maybe
accurate.
there are teachers are less effective teachers, maybe now even with the ban data, you're suggesting maybe too many have been?
If the testing data is flawed and it goes into that complicated formula, that doesn't mean you're getting an accurate response. It may be accurate, it may not be. We need to have some time to look at the results to figure out if it's working or not. Part of the numbers you hear in the legislature under the previous system, too many teachers were rated effective and highly effective. Well, that was around 98%. Under this new system that we put in place last year's evaluation, 98% of the teachers are effective and highly effective. It could be that we actually have 98% of our teachers effective and highly effective, no matter what system they create.
You know, the higher the stakes, the more temptation for schools to cheat. Is that a problem?
Not one that I've seen in this state that's widespread, and I would certainly hope that nobody would cheat, that that's not the way to improve the system. It doesn't help kids.
I have just a question on the 20,000, the data that you have in the press release. How exactly did you solicit responses from parents and teachers? I mean, did you just look at your membership roster, and, I mean, how exactly?
For any member that we had an email address, we emailed the link to the test to, through Twitter and Facebook. We put it out that it was there, and that's how we got the response. We didn't really, you know, it wasn't like there was a major campaign to actually get the responses. It was just direct communication, one-on-one with members. It was basically word of mouth to get 20,000 people to fill it out within 3 weeks.
All right, thank you for coming out. Andy and Joanne will be available